So how many teams are going to make the dance from the Southeastern Conference? Is it 4? Is it 6? Is it 5? I don't know, but I think that it's interesting to look at Vegas and what they say. They have currently, of the 10 most likely teams to make the college football playoff from an odds perspective, 5 of those are from the Southeastern Conference. Then you go down the ladder even further. You got Tennessee right outside the top 10. You got Missouri right outside the top 10. You got Texas A&M, I believe, within the top 15. Vegas likes the SEC, and for good reason. In the 4-team format, 6 of the 10 national titles were won by the SEC. Now, Jesse Simonton has a great column on on3.com about this very topic, so go check that out. But I think as soon as the college football playoff became a reality that was expanding, as soon as we found out we're going to 12 teams, and even before that, when people were clamoring for an expanded playoff, the thing that a lot of SEC naysayers were shouting about was, good, this is finally going to mean that the SEC is going to get what they've got coming to them. Because I think a lot of SEC naysayers, folks that think the SEC is overrated or it's not all that, or maybe they're just sick of the SEC in general, and I mean, you're entitled to your own opinion. They have long stood on the idea that adding more teams into a playoff format will keep the SEC from being able to just play each other and then find themselves in a smaller playoff format where they have a shorter path to victory. I'm here to tell you, you're not actually getting what you, I think, are hoping for if you're an SEC naysayer. Because the reality is at least a third of this playoff is going to be made up by the SEC. So when the hope was they would have more resistance and have a more limited chance at a national championship, that's not going to happen. In fact, it's going to be exactly the opposite. So I think 4 teams feels like the floor. Like four to me is an absolute layup for how many teams get in the college football playoff from the SEC. Because from where I'm sitting, you'll have the SEC champ. That's obvious. You're also, I don't know how you leave the SEC runner-up out of the college football playoff. Like, go back to last year. Georgia, I've said this for a long time. If they were healthy, if you gave them some time to recover, which they would have had if they were in a 12-team playoff last year after the game in Atlanta, I think they were the best team in college football. I think they would have won the whole darn thing. So take of that as you will. So you have those 2 absolutely in. And then I think you're going to have some teams that fall in that 11-1, probably more likely 10-2 range that will look the part, will probably have some quality losses, which is an ugly word, but that's where we are in college football. 5 teams from the SEC getting the dance, that's where I think it gets really, really intriguing. Because who they're being compared to will be teams from the ACC, the Big 12, the Big 10. And if you have teams with equal records, I think the SEC is going to have a better resume. But also, like, let's talk about the eye test for a second. Like, we talk about the eye test when it comes time for, like, Selection Sunday, and it's kind of, I mean, people hate it because it's kind of hard to quantify, but, like, the eye test is a real thing, and the SEC is going to pass that with flying colors every single time. If you don't believe me, look at the NFL draft. That is a business that is, from what I understand, almost exclusively, not exclusively, in large part, has a pretty large emphasis on the eye test. They go to the SEC more than any other conference, so take of that as you will. But let's talk about the path they'll have from the SEC to the college football playoff throughout the course of the regular season. Compare that with some other teams that they could be battling for that maybe last spot in the playoff, or if the SEC is trying to get a 5th team in and they're up against a Big 10 team. More than likely, it's going to be a 10-2 team from the SEC or a 10-2 team from the Big 10. Again, we're already assuming 2 other 10-2 teams from the SEC get in. So let's talk about that 3rd or 4th 10-2 team. Let's just say it's Tennessee. They're right on the fridge of those top 10 teams. This is just for an example. Let's say it's one of those teams that's a Tennessee or let's say an LSU. If they're 10-2, they will have better reference points than I think any other teams will across the country for how they stack up to get into the college football playoff. Like, we hate saying the word good loss or close loss or quality loss, but Tennessee, they play Bama and they play Georgia. Both teams that I would say right now most of the college football public expects to be college football playoff teams. So if Tennessee plays Bama close, plays Georgia close, or plays one of them, heck, let's say they beat one of those teams, that's going to bode well for them on the resume. And Penn State, they should be 11-1. But what if they do go 10-2? What if they do drop a game they're not supposed to? They lose to Ohio State. Compare reference points. Ohio State is the best reference point for a Penn State. Tennessee, you got Bama, you got Georgia. And so if you're stacking up losses, if Tennessee looks better in those games than Penn State does in their one game against Ohio State, I think you give the nod to the 10-2 SEC team. Let's talk about the ACC. I think Miami, as we sit here right now, is thinking college football playoff. I think they're thinking, let's go ahead and win a game in the college football playoff if we're going to be honest about it in Coral Gables, right? Like, that's kind of what this year is about for you. But let's just say they end up going 10-2, and let's say they don't make the ACC championship game for whatever reason. LSU and their reference points, they're going to play Bama. They're going to play Ole Miss, which I think are both probably at this point in time widely thought to be college football playoff teams. Miami, who's their reference point? Florida State, Florida. I'm not saying those are bad reference points. I'm saying they don't stack up as well as what LSU or a Tennessee or other teams across the SEC will have to do. Now, this is not true for every single team across the conference in the SEC, but I think when you look at the total body of work, you're going to look at those schools and who they've had to play and how they stack up, and they will look better than teams in the ACC, the Big Ten, and what have you. So as we sit here right now, I understand that we talk a lot about easy schedules and that being a benefit, and it's okay, they got a path, but I don't know that I would think that's quite the advantage when it comes down to splitting hairs and finding your way for that last spot in that large bid. It's great if you're trying to win a conference title. It's great if you're trying to get to the conference title. But if you find yourself slipping up and not handling business how you're supposed to, and you get into that 10-2 logjam and you're not in the SEC, I think it could ultimately end up hurting you. Again, I'm using Penn State, Tennessee, and LSU as just schools to speak to as an example, but I think overall the sentiment, in large part, painting with the broad brush, rings true. So if I had to say today how many teams I think are going to get into the college football playoff from the SEC, 4 is a layup, but y'all, I would say 5. I genuinely believe 5 teams will get into the college football playoff. Now 6, if they get 6 in, there will be riots across the U.S. in college towns all over this great nation. Like, there will be. I'm just telling you right now. 6 would surprise me. 6 would mean a lot of teams in other conferences didn't handle their business how they were supposed to, and the SEC just kind of backdoored their way into 6 teams. 5, to me, though, is probably the number I would hang my hat on right now for the reasons I just said. The resume is going to favor them. The eye test is going to favor them. The reference points for even their losses going to favor them. So, yes, we're in Dallas. Yes, we're at SEC Media Days, but I think 5 teams would be my shot I would call right now for teams from the Southeastern Conference to make the college football playoff. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.